Hi, my name is Brian and welcome to Yoga Hub Online Studio. This practice is going to be focusing on using our breathing to try and find a little sense of release in the muscles of the back of our body, a common area where we can hold a little bit of tension. It's going to be a simple enough practice, but you might find it useful to have some props. I would recommend a block or something that just looks like a block. You can use a chunky book, whatever it might be. You might also find it nice to have a bolster, or again, just something that is similar to a bolster. Blankets, cushions, pillows, these things can all work just as well. So we're going to be in this practice lying down in a supported Shavasana. And there's going to be a few little things we're going to want to do to set ourselves up. First thing I'm going to recommend is that you grab a blanket, which you're going to fold up a couple of times, and you're just going to pop that down the top of your mat to act as a pillow. Second thing that we're going to do is take our bolster, one of our bolsters or one of our bolster substitutes. So if you're using pillows or something like so, that's perfect. And you just want to place this underneath your knees. You're then going to lie down, letting your head rest onto your pillow, and you adjust that pillow as much as you would like to, just to make sure your head is as comfortable as it can be. You then have the option of placing your second blanket over your body just to keep yourself warm. And the final option, which is just an option, is to grab your second bolster or whatever your second bolster substitute is and place that along the front of your body. You don't have to be crazy specific here, but you want to think of the bolster roughly running from the front of your pelvis up towards your chest, again in a way that feels comfortable for you. If you like, you can hug that bolster, or if you prefer, your hands will just rest down onto the ground. Eyes can be open or closed, it's really just personal preference. And what you might do is just take the first moment or two and just let yourself move around, which can be as simple as just rolling out your wrists and ankles. You might give your head a little nod from side to side. You might bring a little bit of movement into your arms. You might bring a little bit of movement into your legs. You might even bring a little bit of movement into your face, like scrunching your eyes, giving your nose a little wiggle, or even opening up your mouth. Have a yawn, have a sigh. Anything that stretches out your jaw can always be useful. Basically, just any little movements that feel nice for you, you're going to let those little movements happen. And for me, important to remember that although this is a practice about doing a little bit less, that doesn't mean that this is a practice of stillness. Because basically, as long as you're breathing, your body is never actually still. So as we go through this practice, if at any stage, a little bit of movement, any little wiggles, any little intuitive adjustments that you feel like you'd like to make, you're going to let those little wiggles, you're going to let those little movements, you're going to let those little wiggles or those little adjustments happen. But if you haven't already, next moment or two, you're going to let yourself just settle into relative stillness. And we're going to begin by going through a little exercise around this idea of doing a little bit less. And where we're going to begin is with our breathing. Now, the most important thing here is that you always want to be breathing in a way that feels comfortable for you. But what I'm going to recommend is, as best you can, you do your best to breathe in gently through your nose. So for this practice in particular, no real need to be breathing with any big force. No real need to be breathing with any kind of big effort. The image that I'd recommend instead is if you imagine that you had a little feather underneath your nose. See if you could do your best to breathe in so gently that feather would only barely move. And so there's a half decent chance that what you're going to notice is when you start to breathe a little bit more gently, your breath also might start to get a little bit smaller. Right? The volume of air that you take in might be a little bit less. Remembering again, we want all of this to feel comfortable, but in a way that does feel comfortable, you might let your breath get a little bit smaller. So that rather than thinking about breathing deeply, we're just thinking about breathing gently. And whenever you're exhaling, again, no big effort, no kind of force. You just do your best to take your time. And this doesn't mean that your exhales need to be any specific length. It more so just means that with attentiveness, you're going to try and follow your exhales towards their natural end. And then if you take a little moment and just bring your attention to the space between your eyebrows. Well, in a similar way to how you were softening your breath, see if you can begin to soften that space as well, which might kind of feel like letting your eyebrows drift away from each other. It might feel like letting the skin of your eyelids get a little bit softer. Maybe the skin of your forehead gets a little bit wider. If your lips are closed, and they definitely don't have to be, just if they are, try to let your lips just barely meet. And if you need to, let your bottom teeth kind of just drift a little bit away from the top teeth and try to feel the skin of your cheeks get a little bit longer. And then see if you could bring your attention to everywhere that your body is supported by something. So maybe the blanket behind your head, what you might have underneath your knees, and then the ground beneath you. Well, with each exhalation, almost imagine letting yourself receive that support a little bit more. With each exhale, try to let yourself really release to whatever you have beneath you. And when you're doing all of this, there's always a half-decent chance that thoughts are going to be coming and going. You're going to get a little distracted. Your mind is going to wander. And in the same way that I wouldn't really recommend that you think of this as a practice where you're not meant to be moving, also don't feel like this is a practice where you're not meant to be thinking, or if you're thinking, it means that you're doing something wrong. What I would recommend instead is, in language that resonates with you, you set yourself a little intention to rest. And then when thoughts are coming and going, rather than labeling thoughts as like bad or whatever it may be, kind of just to yourself think, in relation to my intention, is this thought useful? And if it is, then you can think away, because you can actually get some really good thinking done in a practice like this. But if that thought isn't useful, well, then maybe instead of trying to think that thought away, see if you can instead bring your attention back to a softer breath. Bring your attention back to softening the muscles of the face. Bring your attention back to releasing into the support beneath you. And without any major expectations. Because this is just a practice. We don't have to be doing anything perfectly. But you just see how that goes. And as simple as this may be, and simple never means easy, but this on its own is doing your body a whole lot of good. And if for any reason at all you felt like just staying, lying in this position, this can be a beautiful way to practice restorative yoga. But if you feel okay to do so, we're going to change this position a little bit, and we're going to come into something which I like to call a spooning asana. So for spooning asana, what we're going to do is you're going to take one of your bolsters or your bolster substitutes, probably the one that's on your body, if it was on your body, is going to be the most useful. And you're going to pop that behind your head. So you're going to make the pillow behind your head just a little bit bigger than maybe it would have been just using your blanket. Then your second bolster substitute, so maybe the one that's underneath your knees, you're going to place that along the side of your body. So you kind of want to think roughly lengthways from your hip up towards your left armpit. Left leg, this can then go long-ish. Right knee comes in towards you, and it doesn't have to come particularly far. What you're going to then do is roll over onto your left-hand side, resting your right leg on your bolster. And you can kind of play around with this. So some people like to position themselves so that their whole leg is resting on the bolster. Some of you might like to position yourself so that your right foot is off the bolster and your right foot is maybe like, or your right leg is like a little bit long. Not all the way straight potentially, but it doesn't have to be super bent either. Depending on what's going on in the room that you're in, you might like to take one of your blankets and just place that underneath your right foot for a little bit of extra cushioning, or you might even like to take that blanket and place it underneath your left hip for a little bit of extra cushioning. Your second blanket, this can either be on your body just to keep you cozy, or just wherever you'd like it to be. In terms of your arms, probably the most useful is left arm away to the left-hand side and your right arm just sort of hugging around your bolster. Basically, just imagine this bolster is something that you might like to spoon. And what I would recommend is actually let the back of your body round. So in a way that feels comfortable, let your right shoulder come forwards. In a way that feels comfortable, let your upper back get a little bit bigger. But you can also, again, be really intuitive in terms of where you're placing your arms. They don't have to be anywhere super, super specific. Again, you don't have to be still. You can take a moment or two to let yourself move around. But as soon as you feel ready to do so, you again might just let yourself settle into that little bit of steadiness. And we're going to give ourselves a little bit of time here. Now, if you're a little bit newer to restorative yoga, there is a half-decent chance that in this kind of position, you're not going to be feeling anything super dramatic. It's not going to feel like the biggest stretch you've ever had in your life. And for me, I think what you want to do is actually embrace that. Lean into the fact that hopefully you're not feeling anything too dramatic. And instead, allow yourself to explore the subtlety of just softening into the position. Finding that slightly softer breath. Although you're in a slightly different shape, again, trying to really release into the support beneath you. Remembering we don't need to be rigid or stiff. Movement always welcome. But if it's okay to do so, we're going to spend just roughly another 90 seconds or so here. Just doing that little bit less. And then same as the first position we begun in, if you feel like spending a little bit longer here, you can spend a little bit longer here. Convenient for you to do so. You can even like pause the video and just take all the time that you need in this position. But if you do feel ready, I'm going to recommend that just over the course of the next few moments, we're going to begin to switch to the other side. Now, sometimes when you've been spending a little bit of time in one position, and then the opportunity to move arises, we can sometimes jump at that opportunity, consciously or unconsciously, and move kind of quickly. And while that's not a disaster, it can sometimes just slightly disrupt the energy that we're trying to cultivate. So I always recommend that you do your best, consciously let yourself move slowly as you begin to change to the opposite side. Now that change obviously doesn't have to happen immediately. So if you just need a moment or two to let yourself lie flat, again, any little stretches or adjustments, feel free. But then you'll just switch whatever your right leg was resting on over to the right side of your body. You'll let your right leg go long. You'll let your left leg come in. And you just switch over with the left leg coming over and your arms sort of resting into the position that feels most natural or most comfortable for you. Now, when we work into the second side, so there is a decent chance that your two sides are going to be similar, but don't feel like they have to be perfectly symmetrical, because basically nobody is perfectly symmetrical. As a little example, your heart, it just sits a little bit to the left in your chest. So that means that your left lung is a little bit smaller than your right lung. It means that the left side of your ribs tend to be a little bit smaller than the right side of your ribs. So these little asymmetries, they tend to run through the body. So like I said, it's okay for them to be similar, but if for whatever reason this second side just wants to look a little different, whether that's the arrangement of your arms, your legs, whatever it may be, you let it be that little bit different. Same thing, nothing ever needs to be stiff. But as you spend a little bit longer here, you're just doing your best to just do that little bit less. And then just the same kind of thing again. This is feeling particularly nice. It's feeling particularly useful. You can stay a little bit longer, hit pause, whatever you need. But if you do feel like you've gotten what you need from this position, then somewhere over the course, next couple of moments, you're going to start to bring yourself out of this shape. And Again, can be nice just to consciously move slowly as you maybe naturally find your way onto your back or whatever position works. You might just allow that little bit of movement, any little adjustments, whatever sort of feels nice for you. And then over the next few moments, we're going to start to set ourselves up for the next position we're going to come into. This one requires like a small little bit of arrangement. So I'm going to start to talk you through it. You obviously just join in or follow along when you feel ready. And this is a position which is called supported fish pose. It requires temporarily sitting upright because, even sometimes in restorative yoga, we have to move around a touch. But what you're going to do is take one of your bolsters, or again, your bolster substitute, so pillows, whatever you might be using, and you're going to place it lengthways along your mat, kind of like so. Some people like to do this with the bolster flat. I think most of us benefit from having a little bit of elevation. So you can take a block, or again, whatever your block substitute might be, and play around with the height. You can go low, you can go medium height, you can even be at the highest height. Again, you can be stacking books on top of each other if necessary. And you're basically going to place something under the top of your bolster, or again, your bolster substitute, just so it's a little bit higher than the bottom end. I like roughly about the medium height, but again, you play around with this in the way that works for you. Then I would recommend that you get one of your blankets, which again, you're going to fold up a few times, so similar to like we did at the very beginning, and you're going to pop that at the top of your bolster like so, just so you have a little bit of extra cushioning for your head. And then if you have them, you're going to grab your other two blocks and you're going to place them at a lower height, just either side of your bolster. So kind of like so. And then your second bolster substitute, if you have it, you're going to bring this down the bottom of your mat and you're going to sit with your bum just in front of your little reclined bolster thing here. Two kind of options. So some people like to sit where they're right into the bolster, so you kind of feel the back of your hips touching the bolster. My personal preference is to sit a little bit away from the bolster, because I find when you sit a little bit away, it keeps your lower back free, which is something that I find nice. But you can try both and just see what you prefer. In terms of your legs, so you have some options. First option is to place the soles of your feet together, with your feet in close to your body, or even really far away from your body if you like. Now, some of you in this position, your feet will touch and your knees will kind of fall down towards the ground. If you're one of those people, you can let your knees just rest on the ground, good place them to be, or you might even like to use your second bolster to kind of rest over your thighs like so. Some people find that like nice and grounding. But if you're like me and your knees are away from the floor, then I would recommend that your second bolster goes underneath your thighs to give your legs a little something to rest on. If having your feet together is just not your buzz, then they can just go straight out in front of you, same as they were at the very beginning. Or if you even want the soles of your feet resting on the ground, that can be nice too. Then you're going to let yourself lie back to rest onto your bolster. Again, my recommendation is just a little bit of extra support for your head. And you want to feel this position create a little bit of space through the front of your body, but not in a way that starts to make the back of your body feel really, really tense. So again, if you want to make yourself a little higher or a little bit lower in terms of what's underneath your bolster, feel free. Find a little option here. Is I think it's nice for your hands to rest onto your two blocks beside you. And you can have your palms just like flat on the blocks. You could have your palms facing upwards. Or it can sometimes even be nice just to let your forearms rest onto the blocks. And then your your wrists kind of release. And your hands just fall down onto the ground. You can obviously have a blanket over your body, over your legs, just to keep yourself cozy. Same thing, any little movements to help you settle in, you let those movements happen. And same thing again. We're going to be here for a little bit of time. And as best you can, you're going to do your best to just do that little bit less. Nothing again ever needs to feel stiff. Movement is welcome if it's ever necessary. Again, we don't need to be here with this perfectly blank mind. If you get there, it can be nice. But again, just returning to that little intention to give yourself this opportunity to rest. Maybe just letting that softer breath, the support that you have underneath you, guide the way. As long as it's comfortable to do so. And we're going to give ourselves about another 4 minutes here. And then again, we're not in any kind of rush here. Sometimes it can be nice just to consciously take your time. And if again you feel like spending a little bit longer here, you're very, very welcome to do so. But somewhere over the next few moments, if your feet were together, you might start to just send your feet out long, letting your legs lengthen, maybe pointing your toes forwards, rolling your ankles, giving your legs a bit of movement. It'd be nice to maybe nod your head a little side to side, have a little stretch out of your arms. Maybe even if it didn't feel like too much effort, your arms go up and overhead, you have a yawn, a sigh, whatever's good. And over the next moment or two, you're going to just start to ease yourself up off whatever it is that you were lying back on. And we've got one more position that we're going to come into. You might just start to place your props off to the side to begin with, but keep them within arm's reach. Not that I'd be anticipating you're throwing them halfway across the room, but just to keep them somewhere handy. You're then going to come back to just that little pillow for your head, same as the beginning. So a blanket folded up as many times as you feel that you'd like to. Your blocks and stuff can probably just go off to the side for now. And then you're going to lie down, but with one of your bolster or bolster substitutes. When your head is comfy, you're going to bend your knees, feet to the floor. You're going to lift your hips off the ground, and you're going to place something underneath them. Some of you might like to use blocks here, but I think something soft is nice. And you want to try and avoid placing any pressure around the bones of your lower back. So as best you can, it's the flesh at the back of your hips that's being supported. Let your arms be where they want to be, out wide, overhead, or even just long down beside your legs might be nice. You can keep your feet flat on the floor. Some of you might like to walk your feet wider than hip width distance. Some of you might like to come closer than hip width distance. Or some of you might even like to lengthen your legs, letting your heels rest on the floor, but lifting your toes off the ground. That just feels like a little bit too much effort or too much work though. No worries. You can just keep the knees bent. And we'll just take a moment or two here. Again, we're in a slightly different position to what we would have been at the beginning, but same as the beginning. Just really letting yourself sink into the support beneath you. And then this on its own, lovely place to be. If this feels like somewhere you'd kind of like to stay a little bit longer, you definitely can feel free to do so. But if it's okay, what I'm going to recommend is that you keep your hips elevated, so you keep the thing that's underneath your hips, but you start to walk your feet in if they were long, and you start to lift your feet up off the ground. And if comfortable, you're going to start to send your feet up towards the ceiling. So your legs are going to get long, but I would actually recommend consciously don't straighten your legs all the way. Let your knees stay a little bit relaxed, let your feet stay a little bit relaxed. And you can let your legs just hang up here, or if it's nice, you're gonna let yourself move, which can be as simple as just drifting your legs side to side. You might find it nice to move your legs away from each other, then maybe back towards each other. You might even find it nice to bend one knee a little deeper, let the other leg lengthen a little bit more, and then switch it around. You might even find it nice to bend your elbows so your hands come off the ground. Maybe move your wrists, maybe even nod your head. To a certain extent, the exact movements that you're making, not the most important thing in the world, but again, I would recommend whatever way you are moving, let yourself move relatively slowly. It doesn't have to be crazy slow. You definitely don't want it to be like frustratingly slow. But trying your best to move at a pace which encourages everything just to settle. And then final little option here, which again is definitely not essential. But if it feels okay, you're going to make your hands into gentle fists, and you're going to bend your knees enough so you can take your knuckles onto your shins, push in a little, and then start to brush your shins up and down with your knuckles. So while again, you just want to let this be intuitive, if you were to go a little bit off center of your shin, so a little bit to the right on the right shin, a little bit to the left on the left shin, there's a muscle that lives around there called your tibialis anterior, and it's a muscle that does a lot of work in relation to the movements of our feet. So it can be a nice muscle just to give a little bit of attention to. You can even pause at a certain point, go a little side to side. But again, you're just letting this be really, really intuitive. And then again, it doesn't feel like too much effort to do so. You might take your hands and bring them to the back of your shin, so to your calves. And what I'd recommend here, what can be nice with your calves, is just like grab them, give them a little squeeze, give them a little pinch, and just sort of work your way down your calves in that way. Sometimes when you get towards your Achilles, bringing your thumb to the front of your ankle can be nice. But again, you let this be intuitive, just any part of this lower back of your lower leg that would benefit from a bit of attention, you're going to work away. And then again, it's not essential, but if it doesn't feel like too much effort to do so, bend your knees enough so you can get your hands up towards your feet. And same thing again, you're just going to let this be intuitive. We're just going to give your feet that little bit of attention. So it can be nice to press in a little bit around the arches of your feet, maybe a little bit around the balls of your feet, or maybe even using your fingers just to spread out your toes. Sometimes giving a bit of attention to the space between them might feel nice. But same buzz again, just whatever works for you, you work away. Final little option here is just let your knees bend loads. Let your heels kind of drop a little towards your bum. Even let your knees move a little bit away from each other and your hands just drop down onto the ground. Just take a very supported, happy baby. But a happy baby where there's no intention of reaching or pulling. You're just going to try to let everything sink. And then as always, there's no kind of rush. Somewhere over the next few moments, you're going to start to make your way towards that same supported Shavasana that we begun this practice in. So letting your feet come down and removing whatever was underneath your hips so your hips can find their way to the ground, and maybe just placing something underneath your knees so that when your legs go long, your legs are supported. You might keep the pillow behind your head, you might throw a blanket over your body, or you might again take your second bolster or whatever that is for you and place it along your body. So just again, you're giving yourself like a slightly weighted blanket here. You can hug that bolster, your arms can be long. But as we come to this final little resting position, for me, in restorative yoga, you just want to choose whatever position feels like the least amount of effort for you. So this supported Shavasana might be nice, but if you want to come into one of the other positions that we've taken in this practice, if you want to come into a position that we haven't done in this practice, then that is a nice place to be as well. As always, you're going to take your time. And as always, nothing ever has to be stiff. Still move if you want to move. Maybe again, just encouraging that gentle breath. Allowing yourself to fully receive whatever support that you have beneath you. And as best you can, you're coming back to that little intention. Just doing your best to rest. Nice thing about practicing online is that we don't have to be limited by the schedule of a physical studio. So as you come towards the end of this video, you can obviously begin to bring yourself out of your Shavasana now, but if you have the time, if you have the space to stay here a little bit longer, I would definitely encourage you to do so. But thank you very much for taking the time to go through this practice with me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I see you again sometime soon.